Well, hi everyone. My name is Jeff Dahlhammer, probably best known for writing Perl Critic. I was really happy when Tom Metro reached out to me a few months ago and asked me to come down and talk about Pinto with the Boston.pm. So I have him to thank for setting all this up, and Rick as well for doing all the technical legwork to make this happen. This is the first time I've ever used a Google Hangout before, so far it's been pretty smooth. Uh, Today we're gonna talk about Pinto and more generally dependency management for Perl. If you've done a lot of work with Perl and written reasonably complex applications, you know how much of a pain dependency management can be. Right now I'm gonna kick off the slides and we'll jump into. We're gonna do a little bit of a slideshow, and then at the end I'll do a live demonstration, or sort of semi-live demonstration to show you what Pinto does, and then we'll do some questions at the end. Or I suppose if you've got something urgent, you can go ahead and spit it out, and Rick will turn the mute off, and we'll have a little conversation. Let's see. So now I got to figure out how to turn on the screen sharing here. All right. And entire screen share. Okay. So I hope everyone sees a slide. I've got 99 problems, but CPAN ain't one.
Yeah, we're seeing fine.
Okay, great. I'll keep going. All right, I'm going to start out by making an assertion. Most of your app is not yours. If you think about all the code that has to be deployed to make your application work, the frameworks, the APIs, all the open source stuff, it's thousands of lines of code, and yours is really just the tip of the iceberg. I bet it's probably not more than 10% of the entire stack is stuff that you guys wrote. So if you're working in Perl, where did the rest of that stuff come from? Well, most likely it came from CPAN, and probably includes many of the 129 some odd thousand modules that CPAN has. But if you're building your application from the public CPAN, there's a problem, and that this public CPAN is constantly changing. Authors like me can upload new versions of modules. We can take old ones down, and even though we try to maintain backward compatibility, sometimes we fail, and sometimes we deliberately break things. And if you're building your application from the public CPAN and you're eating all of these changes that CPAN authors are spitting out, then you can never really build the same application twice. Right? If you run CPAN and install a stack of modules on Monday, you'll get one version of things, and if you do it again on Thursday, you might get something different. And this is a real big problem because consistency matters quite a lot now. I'd argue it matters more now than it used to. Back in the day, I used to work with maybe one or two very large servers. So, and those servers rarely, the applications on those servers rarely, if ever, got built up from bare metal. So basically, things got installed once. Nowadays, we have cloud computing and virtualization and all these things. So we're spinning up applications from bare metal all the time now, right? Being able to do that consistency matters a lot more now. Also, with the sort of the big data and the whole scientific community fits into this nicely as well. Right? If you're doing scientific research that's based on software in some way, bioinformatics or any of that sort of thing, and you need to be able to reproduce your results, or actually some other scientist needs to be able to reproduce your results to verify it. And the only way to really do that reliably is if they have the exact same software. So again, that's another aspect of the consistency issue. And one way to solve this problem is to create your own private CPAN. Now, this isn't the only solution. There are others that are out there, but a private CPAN is what Pinto does. And the difference between a private CPAN or a Pinto repository and the public CPAN is the private CPAN only changes when you want to. Right? No matter what libraries I ship to the public CPAN, the stuff in your private CPAN only changes when you decide to upgrade. So you can run your build command again and again and again and again, pulling dependencies from your private CPAN, and you'll always get the same thing. You'll build the same app every time, no matter what happens out in the wild. The cool thing about Pinto is that it's not just for CPAN modules. You can actually, if you're at the point where you're building your code, your own code in the form of CPAN-like distributions, you can stick those into your Pinto repository as well. So it's like having the whole PAWS infrastructure in-house, privately. So you can use the whole Perl toolchain to manage dependencies and build and test and install your own private code, the same way that you manage all of your CPAN libraries. So I know you're all pretty jazzed about this now. A private CPAN must be the coolest thing that you've seen all week. Since it's only Tuesday, there's still lots of time left to beat that. But I dare ask, what could be better than a private CPAN? Anybody want to venture a guess? All right. How about lots of private CPANs? Right? If one is good, then many more is better. The cool thing about Pinto is that it's a bit like a version control system, and you can fork, diff, and revert, and merge CPANs in much the same way that you do with source code. And we're going to see a demonstration of that towards the end here. So that, in a nutshell, is what Pinto does. If you use Pinto, I think you'll have one less problem. You'll have 98 problems, perhaps. And then down there at the bottom is a little URL for installing Pinto. That's also in the documentation. We'll talk about that more in a minute. So now's a good time to stop and ask any questions. And I'll switch back to turn off the screen sharing so you can see my lovely face.
Sorry, it takes me a little while to find where I hid the unmute button. Any questions?
We'll demonstrate how you manage, let's say if a company who wanted to have 2 or 3 different versions of private CPAN for different clusters of servers. We'll show how we would sort of manage those and add new modules or update modules to certain ones.
Correct. The Pinto just manages the repository side of things. How you go about deploying them is still up to you. But it gives you, you can have different versions of things in your repository so that you could build up different servers with different versions of modules. But Pinto by itself doesn't install anything. It's just the repository from which your installer fetches dependencies.
Is it exposed as a single repository that stores multiple versions, or does it expose things as multiple repositories? So you can say this is the poker server repository, this is the the Quux repository and whatnot, and that way you don't have to specify the individual versions. You just know that this particular version or this particular cluster of things has all the right versions.
Right. So what it actually exposes are different indexes, and those indexes can have whatever name you want. So you could call it, server A, server B, and those each have different versions of things in them. And when you install from either of those, we call them stacks. But when you install from either of those stacks, you will get the respective versions of the modules that belong that came from each of them. I actually have a few questions for all of you before I jump into the demonstration. How many of you have some kind of private CPAN in your shop now? And Rick, if you want to count the hands.
The 3 people that came together all do. I know one of the questioners is interested in doing something like this very, very soon. Tom probably is doing something like that. Not currently?
Okay. And the second question then, how many of you are in the habit of packaging your own code into some kind of CPAN-like form? You don't actually ship it to CPAN, but you write a makefile and the meta and all that stuff, and you use the Perl toolchain on your own code.
Those 3 plus 1 more.
Okay.
Tom says occasionally. I've done so occasionally.
We used to do it. That's what we used to do in the past.
Yeah, and 2 people say previous jobs we did it the right way.
Okay.
And you'll do it more.
Probably not.
Ah. We're going to have to convince Ricky.
So, there is a certain amount of overhead to this, and it's not necessarily appropriate for all organizations. If your dependencies don't change very often, or if you don't care that things break when they do, I'm sure you care, but if you have ample time to diagnose it and fix it, then this something like Pinto may not be worthwhile for you. But if you have a reasonably complex situation and you want to be very sure that things are going to work, you don't want to be surprised when something new happens on CPAN and it ends up breaking your application. If that matters to you, then something like Pinto is a pretty good choice. One more question out there. How many people ultimately use like RPMs or Debian or some kind of OS packaging system to ship their Perl code into production environments?
No one.
Nope.
No one. And that's actually really good. I'm not a system administrator myself, but I think that the Perl toolchain is extremely good for installing Perl stuff. So the added overhead of Debians or RPMs and things like that, I've never quite understood that. But there is a way to sort of marry Pinto up with an RPM system and get the best of both worlds. We can go into that later if anyone's interested. All right, so now I'm going to start the live demo.
And we're probably going to want to raise the font size.
Yeah.
Your full screen is not full screening.
It's not full screen.
There's usually with Google is usually up front.
All right, let me try that again then.
No, his screen came up, but it was not full screen, so he's going to want a big font. No, that was just my screensaver.
There we go.
How's that look?
That's good. We're not feeding back, so I'm going to leave the microphone live.
Okay. All right. So the first thing we're going to show is how to install Pinto. Let's start my demo here. And the best way to install Pinto is to just hit this URL, getpinto.stratopan.com, and feed it to bash. Now, Pinto is available on CPAN, and you can install it that way, but that will toss Pinto and all of its libraries into your Perl 5 lib with everything else that you already have installed. What this script does this little bash script is it just installs Pinto and all of its dependencies into this little subdirectory inside your home directory. So it defaults to opt local Pinto. And so what's going to happen is it's going to use CPAN as the installer, but the Pinto executable and all of the dependencies are going to go into that little bucket. And the interesting thing is, when it does this installation, it doesn't actually. I don't actually run the tests for each of these modules, and I can get away with that because all these dependencies are coming from, surprise, another Pinto repository. I control exactly which versions of the dependent modules go into building Pinto when you install it this way. And so it's never going to break when you decide to upgrade some other module. Installing Pinto is not going to break some other application that you have in your environment because all of its dependencies are separate and isolated. So this is how I kind of feel like applications ought to be deployed generally, sort of as opaque boxes, but the CPAN toolchain isn't really amenable to that. So, all right, successfully installed Pinto. This is taking a little longer than usual, possibly because the computer is working hard to feed you this video.
Yes.
What is this Clio thing you use?
Oh, so that's a little sidetrack. So Clio is a little thing that I hacked together that sort of it replays a set of commands interactively, so I don't have to type all of these in while I'm doing the demonstration. I've recorded them, and it does some things like you can pause in the middle of a command and explain something. It's on CPAN. Look for app Clio.
Maybe we're paused right now.
Hello. Oh, you know what it's doing? The CPAN-M, it cleans itself out after a while, and I probably have a huge pile of things that have to be cleaned out. Oh, there we go. Okay. So after it gets installed, it generates a little bash RC file that you can source, and we'll put Pinto into your path. That's what we're going to do down here is just source that file. And if you wanted to make Pinto part of your everyday environment, you would just add that line to your .-rc in your home directory. That's pretty standard stuff.
And that just adds to the paths?
Yeah. All that does is adds a Pinto home variable to your environment and puts the Pinto on your path as well. Okay, so Pinto is just a command line. So the first thing we're going to do is create a repository. We're going to call it myCPAN. This root argument specifies the name of the argument that specifies the location of the repository, and then we use an init command. It's basically Pinto is a command with a bunch of subcommands, just like Git. There's one little thing I have to do. This is a little bit of monkey business to make this demonstration work, but pretend you didn't see that source option there. Go ahead and fire that, and God willing. Poor computer. All right, now I've got a Pinto repository in this directory called myCPAN. Let's just take a quick look and see what's inside of it. And we have the authors and see the O2 packages file and the O3 mod list and the O1 mail RC. If you've ever looked inside of a CPAN mirror, those ought to be pretty familiar to you. The stuff under the .pinto directory, those are Pinto's internals, which you don't really need to think about. But this is what CPAN looked like on day 0. Right? There are no distributions in here. They're just empty index files. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some stuff in this repository now. Let's say we're starting up a new project, and we need to. It's going to be a web-based project, so we're going to have to pick out a web framework. Oops, forgot a step. Let me back up. So rather than having to specify that dash root argument all the time, I'm just going to set this environment variable so that I don't have to type it and you don't have to see it. So all right, back to the project. We're going to start we're going to build a web application. We need to get a web framework, and let's say we've decided on Dancer. So we're going to go fetch Dancer and pull it into our repository with the pull command. And now Pinto's going to go off to the public CPAN. It's going to fetch the latest version of Dancer at this moment and unwind all of its dependencies and pull all of them into the repository as well. And when it's done, it pops open a little commit message like this. And much like Git, you edit your commit message up here at the top. All this stuff down here in blue is comments. It won't appear in the message. But what you do see down here in blue is it's trying to show you what has changed in the repository. So you can read this a bit like a diff. A plus means that something's been added. And these are all the modules or all the distributions that have been pulled into the repository now. So Dancer is in here somewhere. Where is it?
Second line, he says.
Oh. All right. So here's Dancer, and everything else was a dependency for Dancer, or a dependency for one of its dependencies, and on and on and on. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and accept the default message. Right, quit that. Commits those changes, writes that message to the log, and we're done. So just to prove it, let's look inside the repository with the list command. And this is going to show me what distributions and actually what modules are inside the repository at the moment. So here again, we see something that looks a lot like an index file, if you've ever looked inside of one. But on the left, we have module names or package names. And then we have a version number. And then we have the distribution number. I'm sorry, the distribution tarball on the right. So some people get confused about the difference between package and module. Sometimes I use those words interchangeably, but what I generally mean is when I say package or module, it's this thing over here on the left. It's the foo : var, right? That is the module that your application might depend on. This thing over here, Dancer 1.150, that's the distribution. That's the actual artifact that you have to fetch and install in order to provide these modules over here on the left. So is anybody unclear on that?
Everybody good? Yep.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that all those words have kind of become overloaded in the Perl lexicon. So, okay. So we're done with that. Now, let's say we want to go ahead and install this stuff now. All we've done so far is fetched it into our repository. We haven't actually installed it anywhere. So to install it, we can just use the standard CPAN toolchain, right? We could use CPAN-M or CPAN Plus or the old standby CPAN. And I'm going to go ahead and use CPAN-M just because I think it's the most convenient for this demonstration, and it's probably the best installer that's out there right now. But you have to add a couple of options to it to point it at your Pinto repository. One is this mirror-only option, which tells it to not use Miyagawa's metadatabase to help resolve packages into distributions. And the other argument is this mirror switch, and it takes a path that points to the location of the repository. And you could just use a standard file URL if the repository is on your local disk. You can actually also do this over the wire. There's a Pinto server that would let you put in an HTTP URL there. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but it does exist. And then, like normal, I specify the name of the package that I want to install. Fire that off, and away it goes. Now, the thing to notice here is where all the lines that say fetching file, blah, 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 all the dependencies are coming out of the Pinto repository, not from the public CPAN. So I can do this command over and over and over and over again, and I will always get the same stack of modules. We'll let that run for a few more seconds here. Any questions so far?
You tell it to pull from the local CPAN installer cache, say you already manually installed to your distribution's Perl module library, and rather than go refetch it again because it was some monstrous set of things, can you tell it to pull from that?
I'm not sure what you mean by cache.
So CPAN, when you say CPAN install foo,
Yeah.
download that, and it has a local cache of recently installed modules. Can you tell Pinto, fetch, when you tell the pull, can you say, Pinto, get that module from CPAN cache instead of from my on-disk recently installed modules, rather than fetch it off the internet?
So if tell me if I have this right. So in your workflow, you've already installed the module. Yeah. And so it's sitting around in your cache somewhere.
Yeah, see how my
and now you want to say, all right, go put that in my Pinto repository now.
Yes.
Okay. What there is as an alternative to the pull command, there's something called an install command, which if you use, which is sort of a thin wrapper around CPAN-M. And what it does is it will fetch the module from CPAN and go ahead and install it at the same time. So if you were to use that instead of the workflow you're describing, then you achieve the same effect, which is actually a very interesting point that you bring up. Because yeah, a lot of times people will just sort of install stuff on an experimental basis. Like you don't really know which ones which kind of things you want to use. So you might install like 4 or 5 different things, and it might take several days before you actually figure out which ones you want.
Yep.
And by then, the version on CPAN might have changed. So you don't want to take what's on the public CPAN at that moment. You want to use the thing that you installed, a week ago when you started this whole experiment. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So the idea there was you, instead of using, to address that situation, we created this install command, which it essentially becomes your installer. Instead of using CPAN-M directly, you just say Pinto install, and that will fetch the module and install it at the same time, so that the moment that it gets installed, well, actually, before it even gets installed, you've got it stashed in your repository, and it's there for safekeeping. If you decide to not use that module in the future, no big deal. You can delete it out, but it's designed to address that little gap, that little hole in the development cycle where you're not exactly sure if you want the module or not, and by the time you decide, the version on CPAN might have changed.
So that covers you if you start a project after you've adopted Pinto.
Correct.
It doesn't help catching up when you first decide to go with it.
That's right. That's right. So we're going to address that towards the end. But okay. For now, we're just going to do the simple case, which is, assume you've got a greenfield project, and you can choose your stack of tools. You've already decided to use Pinto, and you can, you're building up from nothing.
Okay.
All right. And then I know that's fairly unrealistic. So we'll talk about the real world a little bit later.
Okay. And while we're interrupted slightly, I'll give you a warning. Uri has arrived.
Tell him hello.
Hello back.
Thank you. I got your call. We'll talk later.
Okay. I didn't know you were going to be live here. I thought it'd be like a robot recording. Nothing to say until I see Perl code.
Yeah, just
Okay.
and preferably little then.
Okay, preferably little then. Yeah. Bill is always right.
So, speaking of the real world, a very real situation is when you find a bug in a CPAN module, or maybe it's not a bug, it's just you want to make some slight modification to it. And you do that, and maybe the author is unavailable and you can't get that change added upstream, or maybe you would like to use a module on CPAN if it just behaved like slightly different. And you could certainly code that up yourself, but then you're sort of left with the problem of like, well, how do I get that into the whole build pipeline, right? Because I can't publish it on CPAN, right? I'm not the author, so I can't replace what's on the public CPAN with my version of it. But I want to build my application with my version of it. So Pinto helps solve that. You can basically add that module to your Pinto repository, and then use the CPAN toolchain as usual to build it along with everything else. For this example, let's suppose the URI module has a bug in it, and URI is one of those basic modules that everybody uses for parsing URLs and things like that, and it happens to sound a lot like Yuri's name, so that's convenient. But anyway, let's say there's a bug in it, and the author is on vacation, so there's no way that your patch is going to get into the upstream version. So what you're going to do is use the add command to put it into your Pinto repository. I'm gonna add on this little message at the command line, so I don't have to type it in interactively. And then I give it the path to my version of URI that I've patched, which in this case is URI 134_patched. It's a good idea to give your distribution a slightly different name than the original, so you can tell them apart. Different things should have different names. It's a basic principle I learned from Larry Wall. Go ahead and fire that. And so now Pinto is injecting URI into our repository. And whenever we put something like this into our repository, or we're sort of overriding something, it's a good idea to pin that distribution. And what a pin does is it prohibits anyone else from accidentally changing that distribution. So hypothetically, let's say we've put this new patched version of URI into our repository. 6 months later, you decide that you want to have a different version of LWP, which depends on URI. But the new version of LWP needs a newer version of URI. And unless you're paying attention, Pinto is going to replace your patched version of URI with a new version from CPAN, which may or may not have your patch in it. Right? You want to make sure that that patch has been accepted upstream before you let URI get upgraded. The way we do that is we pin. Again, I'll add the little message and the name of the URI package. And now Pinto is just going to flip a little bit on each package in the URI distribution that says it's pinned.
Hey, Jeff?
Yes, sir.
One out like being pinned.
Well, I promise to unpin you later.
Okay. No, I have a question about that. You said there's a new LWP coming in. It depends on URI. What if it depends on something important in the new URI that you don't have in your patch version? You're out of date.
Yeah.
How do you handle that kind of crossover?
So, okay, so hold on to your hat.
I'm not wearing a hat.
And we're actually going to do exactly that scenario. let's say that 6 months have passed, and the new version of Dancer is out, and it's twice as fast as the old one. And so you say, great, let's get the new version of Dancer, let's rebuild our application and deploy. So we say Pinto update Dancer. Pinto is going to go off, get the new Dancer from CPAN, unwind all of its dependencies, and bring them into the repository as well. It's only going to upgrade the things that need to be upgraded. Just like when you do a normal CPAN install, it doesn't move everything to the latest version. It only upgrades the things that have to be upgraded to satisfy the dependency. And then, bam, what happened? Unable to register URI 160, which is the new version, because it's pinned to this 134 patched version. So this is exactly the situation that Yuri was describing. There's now Dancer needs some new feature from URI 160, but we've only got 134 and we've pinned it. So what Pinto does in this case is it stops. It stops the transaction and says, nope, we can't do this because you've pinned this version, so I can't accept the new version of Dancer. And at that point, it rolls back the transaction and everything goes back to its previous state. So, does that address the question you had?
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty damn cool.
Yep.
But let's say we really want that new version of Dancer, right? Because it is twice as fast. So what we need to do is figure out if the new version of URI is going to be acceptable in our application. Have they accepted our patch, or have they somehow solved the problem in some other way? I don't know. We don't care. Is URI 160 okay? That's the basic question. But in order to do that, oops, I got a little bit ahead of myself. So let me back up a second. When I saw that error message, you might not remember why you had pinned it, because that might have happened many weeks or months in the past. So what you can do is you can do a Pinto log, which will show you something that looks a lot like a Git log. And here you can see at revision 02560, we pinned URI, probably because, at 25C90 we had to patch bug 3253. So this is just demonstrating where all those commit messages go, so that you can look back in history and figure out why the hell you did something. All right. So I'm sorry I got ahead of myself there. All right. So back to the fixing the problem with 160. We want to try out the new version of URI, but we want to do it in isolation. Right? I don't want to force every other developer to have to change their version of URI. I don't want the operations team to start building URI start building the app with the new version of URI. I want to do it in isolation. I want to do it sort of theoretically on a branch, the same way that I would branch to make changes to my source code. So Pinto allows you to do that. You can copy a stack from one name to another. A stack is analogous to a branch. The default stack is called master, and in this case, we're just going to copy it to a name called devel. That's usually pretty quick. Stacks are very cheap in Pinto, just the same way that branches are very cheap in Git. It's basically just a pointer. So you can make these. You can make as many of these as you want. They're very, very cheap. All right. So now we should have two stacks. I can demonstrate that using the stacks command, which is kind of like a git branch-a, and it will show me all the stacks that are in the repository.
If it's so small, why did it take so long?
this computer is working really hard to keep up with the video.
Okay.
Google Hangouts will really
Suck your bones.
Yeah.
And Pinto is written with Moose, so it's not the most it's not the quickest command line tool. Anyway, so here we see the two different stacks, one called devel, one called master. You can see the last modification time. You can see the person who did the modification. You can see a little bit of the commit ID, and then you can see a little bit of the commit message. And you notice that they're both the same, right? Which makes sense. They're copies of each other. They both point to the same revision. The master one is green because it's the default stack. It's the one that Pinto will use if you don't specify a particular stack at the command line. And I'll demonstrate that here in a little bit. All right, so now I've got both my stacks. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to update Dancer, but I'm going to put it on the development stack instead of the master stack. And I'm going to add the force flag, which causes it to override that pin. So the point I want to make, though, is I'm making this change, but I'm only doing it in this development stack. So everybody who's building applications from the master stack is still getting the same versions of all the modules that they had before. This is only happening in my little sandbox.
So force will break any pins necessary?
Correct.
If you heard somebody chuckling, I popped up my CPU percent and my CPU temperature on the receive side of the Google Hangout to show people just how heavy it is.
Oh well, I'm cooking breakfast here on my laptop right now.
I could make tea.
Yeah, I'm gonna have some nice bacon here. Okay, so Pinto went out and fetched the latest Dancer. There's a new author this time. It's from Yannick instead of the previous author. And it also upgraded all the dependencies that had to be upgraded for that as well. So down here in the diff, the minuses are things that have been removed. The pluses are things that have been added. You can see that the old 1150 Dancer has now been replaced with 1.3116. And we'll keep going down. You can see here that our 134 patched version of URI has now been replaced with 160.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look closely here, there's a little exclamation mark on this one, which means that means it was pinned. And here it shows that it has no longer been pinned. So the pin is not preserved when you use
that minus like a placeholder.
Right. The minus is like a placeholder. You can sort of read that like directory permissions.
Yep.
These other letters I can explain real quick. The first letter is either an R or a D to denote whether it's a production release or a development version. And the F, the second character is either F or L, which indicates whether it's foreign or local. Foreign meaning it was something that you pulled from an upstream repository, like public CPAN, and an L for local is something that you added locally.
Question: why is I noticed HTTP was replaced? It looks like that. The removed was the Ramberg one, and then GAS had the new
HTTP body went from Ramberg to Getty.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there it is. Right. Okay. That's HTTP body. Okay.
So yeah, so that was another dependency that had to get upgraded in order to build the new version of Dancer.
Right. I thought we were just touching URI, but that happened with Dancer due to use the new HTTP as well.
Yeah, either Dancer or one of its dependencies. I don't know which.
All right. Something down the chain. I got it.
So it's not he's updating here. We wanted to update Dancer because it's twice as fast, but it relied upon this thing that he patched.
Right.
So all these other things have to get updated.
Okay.
I know. I'm just checking that those are done automatically, not because of this pin thing. We were playing with URI.
Yep.
But somebody else updated the HTTP body, and it noticed that.
Yep.
Right. I understand. I just want to make sure that
Okay.
happened automatically.
Okay, carry on.
All right.
Oh, question in the back.
Is it possible to set up your default stack? I noticed on your update you have a put it stack. So can I set the default stack to be developed?
Is there a variable or something to set --stack devel as the default?
Yes, there's a default command, a command called default, that you use to specify what the default stack is. It's a little bit dangerous because it's global, right? It affects everyone else that's using the repository.
How about an environment variable like you did for the root?
So that's a very good idea. I've been thinking about some sort of like, my default stack switch that only or variable that is just local to you.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
You can have a .pinto file.
Yes.
Another option is it possible to set a stack as read-only?
Do you have read-only stacks?
Sort of. You can. There's a command called lock, which locks a stack, effectively making it read-only. But the lock is advisory. Anybody can choose to unlock it.
But that would prevent you from accidentally updating production.
Correct. So Pinto tries not to be paranoid. I want to assume that we're all grown-ups.
No, we're all paranoid.
And since all changes are logged, you can you know who to blame, and you can also revert to a prior state at any time. So if something goes wrong, it's usually just one command to get back to a previous state. So Pinto does not go out of its way to enforce security boundaries. But the lock command is there for that purpose, to sort of prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah. In an environment where you did want to segregate responsibilities, would you have a cascade of separate repositories for the developers and the build team?
So what some people have done is you can put the Pinto server behind any which is just based on Plaque. You can put that behind any web server you want, and then use HTTP authentication to control who can access it. But Pinto itself doesn't have any like fine-grained controls about who can read and who can write. It's either you have access or you don't. So yeah, if you really needed to segregate who has access and who doesn't, you would have multiple repositories with some layer of security on top of that.
Well, is it possible for, say, you have, say, you have 186 controls and the developer, do they say they Pinto copies from other Pinto repositories, or is that only possible?
Rick, can you repeat that question for me?
Can you use different Unix IDs, Linux IDs to have a master repository and other users be able to copy from it into their own repositories?
Yes. So I don't know that anybody actually does this in practice, but a Pinto repository can, it's fetching stuff from some upstream location, and that location can be anything you want as long as it looks like a CPAN. So the examples we've been doing so far, it's pulling from the public CPAN, but it could be someone else's Pinto repository. So you could have one guy who has, the central Pinto repository, and then other people will feed off of it, and and add their own modules on top of that. Pinto isn't distributed in the way that Git is, so there isn't a way to push changes back upstream. So that sort of like network that I was just describing hasn't. I'm not sure if it's actually useful. I don't know of anyone really using it. But
you can segregate things so that people who shouldn't finger paint in the official copy can finger paint locally and use other methods to push their changes upstream, and the official build people can then pull it out of your local Git and put it into the official local Pinto, and then everybody can see it or something. Workflows are possible.
A lot of it depends on what kind of workflow you want to have, and who needs to have access to what. The people that use Pinto in big organizations like that and have those kinds of problems, they do end up building some layer of controls on top of it. So whether that's like I said, using HTTP authentication to control who has access, or some sort of workflow that dictates who, if a repository, if one gets merged into another, it's.
It sounds like this is workflow agnostic, so that if you know what you want, you can probably build it. If you don't know what you want, this isn't going to tell you what you have to have. But
I wish I had a better answer, because I really strive for Pinto to be useful, very useful, like right out of the box. But I haven't yet figured out like the one true model for using Pinto in a large and segregated, security-conscious organization.
Well,
so I've kind of punted on that and said, well, you figure it out.
Well, there won't be just one, because different organizations will divide up the roles in the workflow differently.
Right.
Hey, Jeff, I got a sort of related question to that. Are we done with that one, you think?
I think we maybe want to see more of the demo.
Well, okay, well, I want to talk more about an organizational question. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's save those later. Let's save organizational.
Yeah, let's hold on to that one, and let me get through this. How long do you guys usually run till?
Midnight.
9:30 our time.
Okay.
Half an hour at least to go. Or probably more.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let me hustle along then. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and write that commit message. Let it go. Notice there I got a little warning telling me that it was forcibly going to change my 1.3.4 patched version to something else. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and install this upgraded version of Dancer. Same as before with the mirror only and the mirror option, but slight difference on the URL here. Instead of pointing to my CPAN, which is the top, which is a root directory of the repository, I add on stacks/devel. So that's how a stack is basically implemented. It's just a subdirectory of the repository.
Is PWD the standard shell PWD?
Yeah, he's on the shell there.
Yeah, no. So, okay,
Yeah. So PWD, yeah, really does mean PWD, like a bad shell.
Just a simplification for
file colon is rooted, so it's not dot specific, so that makes it local.
Okay. Okay, you're working on your current directory, your home directory.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
It's where he created at the beginning of the demo.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Before you got here.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. All right, and then I specify the module name, which is still Dancer. And now it's going to go off, and CPAN-M is going to upgrade Dancer and upgrade whatever new dependencies it needs. again, pulling everything from the local repository.
So fetch is nice and fast.
Yeah, I've never. I don't find that fetching is the slow part. Do you guys do you guys experience that when you're making builds that actually getting the download is the bottleneck?
Yes.
Depends on the network, frequent, and depends how good the tests are on the module.
Right. So if you do have a slow connection to your public CPAN for whatever reason, having that on your local network in a private CPAN can make that much faster.
Yep.
Right. In this case, I'm using a file URL, so I'm basically downloading it as fast as I can read the disk.
Yeah.
If you wanted to share this repository, the simplest thing to do would be to just place it on some shared storage, NFS or something like that. So again, you can download as fast as you can read the disk.
Now, is this build skipping tests?
Right. I've configured CPAN-M to skip the tests just so this demo doesn't take too long.
Right. You're not recommending that. You're just doing that for demo purposes.
Right. And you weren't supposed to ask that question. All right. So there.
Some of us have done demos before.
Well, you've stored it in Pinto, right? So you already know that it works. You don't have to test it every time.
No, at this stage I don't know that. At this stage, I have only fetched things from the repository. I'm sorry, I've fetched things from the public CPAN and stashed them in the repository. I don't know for fact that they actually build cleanly, and that's exactly what I would be doing here. By running that CPAN-M command against the stack, I'm basically trying to test that everything builds cleanly. But as Rick pointed out, he could tell that I'm skipping the tests because I don't want to take this. I don't want this to take forever.
Who's Rick?
Me.
Yeah, Bill.
I've answered to Rick all my life. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, like I said, Pinto's a bit like a version control system. So one of the things you can do is you can diff the different stacks. So I'm going to diff the master and devel, and it will show me exactly how the two trees of dependencies have changed after upgrading to the new dancer. And this looks a lot like the stuff that you see in the commit messages, although it's just the color is a little more helpful. We can see that dancer 1150 was replaced with 13116. HTTP body has been changed. URI 134 has changed. So this is the same thing we saw before. It's just been colorized.
Yep.
So that you can understand it a little better.
So Jeff, I would say Pinto's user granularity is a distribution or a module.
That's right. And that's a little bit of a point of controversy. Perl itself manages everything at the module level, at the PM file, right? That's where your dependency lies. But in the real world, it's the distribution that you have to actually fetch and install to make, to make a PM file appear somewhere. So Pinto deals in terms of PM file. I'm sorry, of the distributions, the tar GZs, because those are the things that matter to it.
Yep. And this is effectively a CPAN proxy that is controllable as opposed to automagic.
Right. Well, it is your own CPAN. It is basically functions the same way that PAWS does, accepting distributions, indexing them, and then creating the file structure that goes with it. But unlike the public PAWS, this one is entirely under your control.
What's the difference in this and what I heard called mini CPAN?
So let's answer that question later. But that's a very good question, so hold on to it.
I got the whole queue of questions now to hold on to. It's not going to be easy.
So after you've made a branch, the customary thing to do is to merge it back into the main branch. So we've got our devel stack. We've done an installation. All the tests pass. It builds cleanly. So now we're going to merge it back into the master stack using the merge command. And again, the arguments are just stack names, just like Git. With Git, you would use branch names. And now it's taking the changes that applied on devel, that happened on devel, and now it's applying them to master. And that's a fast, in this case, it's a fast forward merge. So it just basically moves the pointer forward. If I happen to do a diff at this stage, what would you expect to see?
Nothing.
Exactly right. So Pinto, right now, it can only do fast-forward merges. So if the two stacks, if both of them diverge from the point of origin, from the point where you fork them, then Pinto doesn't know how to merge those, and it ends up being some sort of a manual merge. There is work underway to try and figure out how to do that automagically. But it's not exactly clear what it means to merge indexes, since an index is not exactly like source code. So the semantics of merging we're sort of still figuring out. It turns out that the fast forward limitation is not too big of a deal, because that's what happens in the vast majority of cases. You spin up a separate stack because you want to try upgrading something or adding something to your dependency tree, and you just want to do that quickly in isolation, and as soon as you know that it builds, you end up merging that back into the main stack. So much like in Git, the branches tend to be short-lived, so too in Pinto. The different stacks tend to be short-lived, and usually they get merged back into the master stack very, very quickly, and the fast forward works out just fine. All right. So, the end. Okay. I've got. I can stop for a couple minutes for questions now.
Can you show us where in the log? Can you show us where in the log the pin disappeared?
Yes. Let's see. So my CPAN. Let's see if that does it. Can't remember the option. Pinto has really, really good documentation. Okay. Oh, with this. Okay, there we go. That's what I wanted. So if I wanted to know, okay, when did URI change? So this is sort of like looking at your log with the diffs embedded in it, and I can search through here for, say, URI, and I can see, oh, here, right at the top of the screen, Jeff URI was pinned and now replaced with Giesel's URI.
Jeff, we missed the last 30 seconds.
It's Stephen showed us. Right there.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'll repeat. Yeah. So this is a lot like looking at a Git log with the diff embedded in it. So what we're seeing is the log messages up above here, followed by all of the different changes that happened in that commit. And if we just do a simple text search through here, search for URI, and I can see all the places where URI has changed.
We had to use the force when we updated devel, and we got the warning that the pin was broken by the force when we updated devel, but there was no force required. There was no warning that the pin was being undone on master when we merged. And that
Master would never had a pin. Only devel had a pin, I think.
No, develop
Yeah.
support after.
Oh, okay.
so that was surprising to some folks in the room.
So you could think of the pin itself is just another revision, right? In this case, we unpinned it at the same time that we were pulling in the new version of Dancer, but there's also a separate pin and unpin command. So what we could have done is just done an explicit unpin to remove the pin, and in which case there would be an additional message in the log here telling us that we unpinned URI, and then in the next message would be the upgrade to Dancer.
Yeah, the question was why the merge, which was replacing a pinned version with an unpinned version on master, taking the unpinned from Devil, didn't also require a force or give a warning that master was losing a pin by taking from Devil.
So because in this case it's a fast forward merge.
Okay.
Right? One of the revisions in the sequence of things on the devel stack was to unpin was effectively to unpin URI.
Since we're accepting everything from the devel stack, that's inclusive, and we said we're merging, so we're merging.
Right. Now I think I understand where the question is coming from. So if we had a recursive merge, in which case you ended up with something had eventually become pinned on master that wasn't pinned on devel, so at some point after the fork, master changes and gets a new pin, and that's not present in devel, then that would be a cause of a conflict.
But if you're taking every change on the fork, then you've already unpinned it once, so you're good.
Yeah, but you have to remember that you've done it.
I would, when I'm using this, I realize that you can look at the log and see the change from the exclamation mark to the dash. I really would prefer to have a separate entry log and page, because it's much easier to see
And
in the log than
yeah, and if you want to see unpin, you just make your workflow that you always unpin explicitly rather than do the force.
sometimes the workflow is lost between the fingers and the brain. And so a tool which lets you know explicitly what happens, I think, and maybe you could put it in stupid mode. Say, I would log absolutely everything. If you have two different people with different levels of execution tool.
So having an explicit unpin in the log when the force causes it or the merge causes it would be appreciated for people trying to figure out what happened.
Or even without that, at least just emitting a warning saying, oh, you, just as a reminder, you unpinned when you did that force. when you're doing this merge, you're going to lose that pin. It doesn't have to necessarily.
Well,
We're just emitting a warning saying, "Oh, there's a difference here."
There was a message to the console.
On the
No,
first
not
one.
on the force, on the merge.
The force did it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've beat this to death.
But I do have one quick question. Hopefully.
Separate.
Yes, very separate. So you made a point of Pinto cares about distributions, not files. URI got updated from your patch 134 to 160. We sort of waved our hands about checking that they were updated. Do we have to do that manually, or does Pinto have some syntactic sugar where it will extract those distributions into two different locations and then do a diff-RU or something so you can look at it?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
We waved our hands at how you made sure that URI 1.60 had equivalent functionality. That's problem left for the student.
So my question was simply, does Pinto offer some syntactic sugar for that, where you?
Is there some way to diff the code that's actually delivered in these distributions?
No. Pinto doesn't have that capability. There's some. It is possible to extend Pinto with your own commands. So that's something that you could bolt onto Pinto. But my workflow, has been I will look at Meta CPAN or something like that to if I really want to diagnose like what's in a distribution. You could certainly add a command that would allow you to probe individual files within each distribution, or like sort of a look command that would allow you to extract one in a little temporary directory so you could poke around in it.
Okay.
You could do those sorts of things.
It's not built in. It's doable.
Well, on the CPAN itself, there is a tool.
Yeah.
But if you're doing everything locally,
Yeah.
you don't want to switch to a browser. You're in the shell, dealing with your text editor. So he's talking about going to CPAN.
Okay.
So send me an issue on GitHub and sketch out the sort of workflow that you think you might like to have, and I'll see what I can do.
He said give him an issue on GitHub with your workflow you'd like, and okay, carry on.
All right. So
we open other questions?
No, let's get going.
I don't know where we are.
So that was the sort of the beginner demo. Now we're going to do a little. We're going to get into some little fancier topics. If you're, how many of you are Dizilla users? So, some?
No, not.
Nobody so far.
None. Okay. Well, I really love Dizilla. I use Dizilla for Pinto, and I would love to upgrade ProCritic to it as well. It makes my life super easy, and Pinto plays really nicely with Dizilla. So maybe this will be a motivation for you guys to try it out. But so let's say I'm going to create a module, or let's say I've already created a module. It's called my module, and I've got it in a little directory here. And I'm just going to look at the files that are in here. And it looks kind of like a standard CPAN distribution. There's a lib directory with the PM file in it. And because it's a Dizilla system, I have a dis.ini file. And let's look at that ini file real quickly. You don't really need to know anything about Dizilla. Just need to note this auto prereqs directive down here at the bottom. What that does is it tells Dizilla to look through all of my source code, the source code that I author, and figure out what it depends on. which is basically look at all the use and require statements and try to figure out what my actual dependencies are. It doesn't worry about the particular versions unless you've specified them. It just looks for the names of the packages. So that's really useful because I don't want to have to manage that list myself. And it can be really useful with Pinto. I'm going to go ahead and just spin up another little CPAN directory right here inside my module directory. So you can imagine maybe I've just checked this out from Git, and I actually, inside my Git repository, I have a Pinto repository, which has all the dependencies required to build that module or that application. And that's actually how I work on Stratopan these days. But that makes for a very easy way to ship your Pinto repository to anybody else that might want to build your application. So I'm just spinning up a local CPAN real quick, a local Pinto repository. And I'm going to set that repository root variable so I don't have to type it. And now what I'm going to do is this Zilla has a list depth command, which will basically run that auto prereqs feature that we just talked about, and it will spit out the list of all the things that my code depends on. And then I can just pipe that to Pinto, and with the pull command, and tack on a commit message. And now Zilla is going to go through, find all the use statements, parse out the module names, pass that on to Pinto. Pinto is going to fetch them and their dependencies and pull them into the local CPAN repository. So again, this is a good example of what life would be like in a greenfield kind of world where you don't have a big pile of legacy to deal with. But if you were to start something from scratch and you had already decided to use Diesel and Pinto, this is the kind of workflow you might have. Okay. LS is short for list. I'm going to look inside that Pinto repository that we just populated. And there we go. So this is what my module depended on. We got Mojo, we got app config, and we got template down here at the bottom, I think. Template toolkit. There it is. Okay. So that's just a quick example of how Diesel and Pinto play together. Now let's talk about the real world. Let's say you've got an existing application, and you want to create a CPAN repository that has all the distributions that you've already deployed into production, so that you can rebuild that environment on a new operating system or new hardware in the future, right? This is the money shot here. So in order to do that, we can tell Pinto to pull a specific version of a module. In this case, let's say 1.34. We just use this little notation to indicate what we want. And using a magical database, Pinto will figure out exactly which distribution URI 1.34 came from. When you do this, you often you're cherry picking the contents of your repository. So you don't want Pinto to recurse down into the dependencies, because then it would just end up with the latest versions of those dependencies. You want to be explicit, and you're going to cherry pick exactly which version of each module you want in your repository. So for that, we add the no recurse option. -M is just shorthand for don't bother me about a commit message. Ta-da.
I could imagine dumping %inc on my application in order to get the list of module and version here.
that's one way. Discovering module versions is a little bit tricky. There are some tools that you can use to, well, actually, yeah, percenting might be a good way to go. There's a couple of tools. One's called Dist Surveyor, which I haven't had much success with, but Tim Bunce wrote it, and he's a pretty smart guy.
Yep.
But it will look at your @inc instead of %inc. It'll look at the @inc and comb through all the PM files and try to figure out which version you have. It's trickier than it sounds because Perl doesn't, or PAWS doesn't have many rules about how you version PM files.
We've noticed.
So any number of files called foo can all have the same version, and figuring out exactly which distribution it came from can be very tricky. I offer some consulting services to figure that out. I have some proprietary tools that help solve that problem. But assuming you know which versions you need, this is how you would build up your Pinto repository.
That's why %inc is helpful. It tells you where it came from.
On the file system, but which distribution on CPAN that file came from is the real question. Unless I misunderstand the content of %inc.
There's usually a strong clue in the middle portion of the path name as to the primary package of the distribution.
Well, one of the CPAN installer tools used to make a little pod file, and it would append an item every module you install.
Yes, if you happen to use that one. Yeah. Okay. Carry on.
Yes, it's true. There's things called pack lists, which not all CPAN installers honor, and not all vendor packagers like Debian and RPM packagers respect. But those are supposed to give you a concrete answer as to where something came from. But the organizations I've consulted with often have a very, shall we say, loose process for managing what gets into production. So sometimes, a CPAN module will get installed via Debian package by the sysadmin. Sometimes it'll get installed by a developer or DevOps guy via the CPAN installer. Sometimes it'll just get copied over by SSH or SCP or something like that in like an emergency situation or something like that. So all of these crazy things happen, which make it difficult to diagnose what you really have in your production environment.
This is why I tell people applications should probably have a Perl brew or a live local or both, and not run on the Perl that's running off of the Debian or the AIX or the Solaris installer anyway.
Yes. Yeah. I think Matt Trout said it best. Don't fuck with the system Perl.
Yep. And don't rely on it either.
Yes. So I build my own wherever I go. Actually, I think this feature got removed, so I'm not sure if this is going to work. But the idea here was to just, if you were going to be lazy and you didn't really want to keep track of what was in your Pinto repository, and you just wanted to say, install everything in the repository. Oh, yeah, it's broken. This was supposed to figure out what the primary module was from each distribution, and then feed that to CPAN-M as it's a lazy man's way of saying install everything in the repository. But this actually doesn't work the way I intended, so it got pulled out. Okay, last section. the last little bit. Pinto's pretty easy to use. As you saw, we could spin up a Pinto repository with just one command. So getting up and running is pretty easy. The documentation is very good, but it's still another tool in your tool belt. It's another part of your development process that requires care and feeding. And if you're the type that just would rather not deal with that, we have Stratopan, Stratopan.com, which is basically Pinto repository hosting. Instead of having to set up a Pinto repository on your end, you don't have to install anything. You can just spin one up in the cloud. It can be public or private, and then point your installer at the Pinto repository in the cloud instead of your local one. So I'm going to log into my account here. And here I've got several different repositories. These public ones for Apple, Genentech, open source. This is where I distribute ProCritic from. This Coverity one is a private repository. Meaning that only I can see what's in that repository. No one else can download stuff from it.
Probably don't want to click it then.
Why do you have? If it's private, why would you want to have it up there versus having it on your own machine?
Well, so it's the same reason you let GitHub host source code, right? They take care of the hassle of making sure the servers are up and the disk is there, and they put a nice GUI on top of it for you. So it's the same idea with Stratopan.
And you can share with other people, just not with everybody.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So this feature isn't built yet, but what you would like to do with your private repository is share it with those that are in your organization. Or if you're a consultant, maybe you share it with your clients so that they can, when they go to build your code, they can pluck it out of your private repository that you share with them. But at the moment, private repositories are really are private. Only I can see them.
Yeah, that's the change if you're going to get people to pay money.
I completely agree. Anyway, so let's just look at a public repository. Here's one for Apple. I did some work for them, and at any point in time, Apple generally supports the last 3 versions of their operating system. So at the time, that was Lion, Snow Leopard, and Leopard. And so the application I was working on, it had to work on all 3 of those platforms, and each of those platforms might have had slightly different modules in them. So in order to create a build for each of those environments, I set up different stacks for each operating system, and they might have different versions of modules in them, or just completely different stuff altogether. Here at Snow Leopard, I've got 207 distributions. In Lion, only 136. So
what's the difference?
Well, some stuff got removed.
This is capturing what's built in?
This is capturing what had to be built for each of those different environments.
The Apple environment changed so dramatically that you had to install that many different modules?
No, but the functionality of the application might have changed. So the OS didn't change much. I think between Lion and Leopard, Perl went from 5.12 to 5.14 or something like that.
Okay.
And so there was some small change in modules there. But the majority of the changes come about from differences in the application that was being shipped. And this was not a public application. This didn't come built on the OS. It was something that Apple used internally. And
yeah. Okay.
So your app changed. Therefore, in each version of your app was designed for, it would have a completely different set of modules needed.
Correct.
So a guy running Leopard would then use your CPAN Leopard, your Stratopan Leopard to get it.
Right.
And
What actually happened was there was a build machine that would create, the Snow Leopard package, the Lion package, and the Leopard package of this application, and each one of those was configured to point to a different stack when it made that build.
One quick thing, in Leopard, the first two things are Acme. I know that authors listening, I cannot believe that anybody would use Acme in any production. The rules are, pretty strict about that.
Well, like I said, this was an internal thing, so
Okay.
there might have been, some cruft might have snuck in there.
I've never seen Acme like that before.
Yeah. Okay. Carry on.
So we can. So this view shows me the different stacks that I have. I can drill into each of these. I'll pick Snow Leopard, and I get a little more detailed view. I can open up each of these distributions and see all the packages that are inside of it. Now let's find a good one. Who has a lot of packages?
This is basically a pretty HTML JSON GUI on top of Pinto.
Exactly. And then right now, it just has links out to the Meta CPAN page for each of these. What I'd love to do is actually, instead of sending you off to another site, just serve up the documentation from these files directly, so that this would be a super convenient way to host documentation for your own modules.
Yep.
We can, before I leave this page, right here at the top is just the basic command that you would use to install anything from this module, from this stack. Again, we just use the mirror only and the mirror flags, and the URL we point to this location, which is the same address that's up here in the address bar, actually. So, and we can look at the history of what happened in this repository, and there's some eye candy here. We can look at a dependency graph that helps us understand the relationship between all the distributions in this stack. So I'll hover over. Let's find a good one. So CPAN meta YAML, the red line connects over here to scalar list utils, meaning that CPAN meta depends on scalar list utils. And vice versa, I can see that CPAN meta depends on the green one right there, depends on CPAN meta YAML. So, and you can spin, oops, you can spin these around to help make them a little easier to read. They can get very large for a complex application.
Is that an SVG, he asks in the back?
It is a SVG, and it's built with D3. Those of you, you guys might have seen these recently, actually. If you go to Meta CPAN, and let's pick a module, a Moose, and go to its any module page, the documentation for any module, and we'll scroll down. Over here on the right, underneath the list of dependencies, we've got a dependency graph link. If I click that, it will pop up a similar graph for just Moose.
And it says powered by Stratopan at the bottom.
Exactly right. So this is a web service that Stratopan provides.
Nice.
And so you can spin it around and check the dependencies there. You can also look at the runtime only dependencies
Nice.
versus the other phase. The alternative being all phases.
Jeff,
So
how's that plug?
this is available for everything on Meta CPAN.
Nice, thank you.
How do you plug that into the back there, meaning that you're actually taking the data right from Meta CPAN itself? Or you already pre-analyzed it?
So Stratopan knows all about CPAN.
Okay.
Stratopan itself knows about every distribution that's ever been released. So, for example, let's go back here, and I'll go back to my Snow Leopard repository, and let's say I'm gonna pull something new into the Snow Leopard repository. Anybody think of a recently released module? Let's say ACK, right? So Stratopan knows about everything that's ever been released. So I type in ACK, and it shows me, oh, these are all the different things called ACK that have been released, and I can pick whichever version is the right one for me. We'd like to improve this interface, so you could just sort of say foo : bar, rather than having to figure out the distribution name. So, for example, kind of the same way that you saw on Pinto there, we'd like to say foo bar 2.4.
But that was pretty cool.
Since that's what most developers, they're more aware of the package name than they are of the distribution.
But that using the module name to search the package names there was pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's how Stratopan knows about all the dependencies.
Okay.
It has a big database that has indexed everything that has ever been released to CPAN.
Okay, so then you talk to the Meta CPAN people and then a back connection.
Yeah, actually, it's very simple. If you wanted to put something together for your own site, hang on, widgets. No, not widgets X. Widgets. So embedding one of those graphs is basically just this.
Oh, wow.
It's one line of HTML, and what you get is this. And so you can do that for anything that's on CPAN. Now, what would be really cool is being able to generate these for your own distributions, which might also live on Stratopan, or they might be in your own private place. But for the time being, these embeddable widgets, they only exist for things that are on CPAN. And one use of them, some guy's got like a map of CPAN. Have you guys seen that? Map of CPAN. Yeah. So he's got this interactive map of CPAN. Sort of shows you all the namespaces, and you can like drill into this, and then he's got that same link here. Whoops, I'm finding something different. So he embedded those dependencies. Oh, graph, there it is. It's waiting, loading. All right, so here, he embedded those graphs on his website.
Nice.
Anyway, so that pretty much covers it. This Stratopan might be a commercial service someday in the future. Like actually cost money. It's actually I think it's actually being used in a, I wouldn't say production way yet, but there are quite a few people using it pretty regularly They have, they have their modules set up here in either a public or private repository, and they have automated builds running. I see from the logs that their installer clients are hitting their repositories every day and rebuilding the applications. But this is I haven't really organized this yet, but there's about 720 accounts at present. A couple of them represent institutions, companies. Most of them are just individual developers. But if you can sign up for this now, it's free. And if you do sign up now, you can be guaranteed sort of free access for life, and maybe somewhere down the road you'll sell it up to your employer or your client or something like that. So you're welcome to go to stratopan.com, sign up, check it out, give me some feedback, play around.
And did you say that the graphs don't work for things in private repositories?
Well, so what you get in a private repository is you do get the graphs in a private repository, but what you're seeing here, this is a little bit different from what you see on Meta CPAN. This is the relationship of every distribution in the stack,
right,
versus the relationship of just one subset of modules.
Right, and you get the highlight of the relationships.
Right, and there isn't a way to embed this in something else. And I think that's the point I was trying to make. There isn't a convenient way for you to embed your private graphs into, let's say you have some local documentation or some local local application that you want to display these graphs in. Like you have a dashboard for your code base, and you want to display this there. There isn't a way to embed this graph.
And it also doesn't focus on just the relationships of one, except by colorizing the big graph.
Right. I mean, one possibility, well, you can make each of these like clickable, perhaps, and so if you click on one, then it drills down to the relationships of just that one distribution. I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities here.
Hey Jeff, whether the graph is fascinating to look at, but I'm wondering, how do you use it? What's the point of this kind of thing? It's hard to read, in my opinion.
Well, it'd be easier to read if it was in full resolution on your screen as opposed to...
It's not like the resolution. I can see that could be better. I'm just trying to... I meant conceptually, how do you read it? What is the point? I know dependencies and all that kind of thing. What's the visual of the graph going to tell me that I can't get out of the text type thing?
So that's a very good question. There's one answer. This, and I don't mean this in a flippant sort of way, but it's actually very useful for telling the boss, for showing the boss just how big the hairball is.
Oh, well, okay. What's a less hairball look like? All I see is a bunch of curved lines here, and when you highlight one, you get the colors, but it doesn't tell me how much it does compared to a simple layout.
Let me address that. So a use case for this graph is, let's say that something you want to upgrade something, one of these modules. And if you do that, and let's say maybe you don't have the benefit of a really good test suite. So I want to upgrade. Oh, let's see. Let's find one. All right. I want to upgrade test differences in my application, and I can look at this. What I need to know is, what are the things that depend on test differences that I need to also test to make sure that they're still compatible with the new version of test differences. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about up channel dependencies.
Exactly. So when something downstream changes, it tells me what is upstream that might need to be tested as well. Other applications, I've used them to look for sort of unexpected dependencies. If you're questioning, like, well, gee, do I really need this big pile of dependencies just because I only use like one little feature out of all of that? Maybe I should just reinvent that wheel rather than carrying around the dependency. And you can see that sort of thing in these graphs. You can locate places like that. What's another example? A lot of times, when I'm installing stuff, you'll see dependencies that you just didn't expect, and you want to try and figure out why, because your application doesn't depend on it, right? Or maybe you find there's a dependency somewhere in the chain that breaks, that fails, and you don't know. It's not part of your application. It's like 7 layers down, and so you need to figure out, like, what is that chain of things that you need to start looking at to identify the source of the breakage.
How come file slurp isn't in there?
Sorry, what?
He's asking why his module isn't listed. Everybody should use file slurp.
It's got over 500 dependencies.
Here's a more serious question. Can you show an example of starting? You mentioned that the Pinto server is just a little Slack application.
Right.
Assuming I'm in an organization that doesn't want me to use Stratopan, but I want to be able to have multiple systems be able to pull off the same Pinto mirror, internally to my organization. How would I've created a Pinto stack. I've got a couple of different stacks under it. How do I start up a Pinto server so that's accessible as a mirror from other boxes in my organization?
It's not accessible as a mirror. It's accessible as a resource, right? It's like just another URL that you can hit.
Right.
If you want to mirror it, that's a slightly different can of worms.
Like when I do CPAN M and I say mirror and point.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. You just want to put in a remote URL.
Yeah.
Correct? Okay. So.
How does he spin up the plaque?
Let me show you. Let me make this big again. Oh, there we go. Tell me when it's big enough.
It's good.
Good.
Too good.
Shopping. That's good.
There you go.
I'm not sure why it made the whole screen big. Not. Strange. Oh, that's not readable, is it?
Not anymore.
Oh. Look at that. You learn something every day.
Well, I got a couple of questions in the meantime to get handled that.
Okay, go ahead.
One was, I mentioned before, what's the difference in this and, say, mini CPAN? I've not used either one, but what's the win or lose of either one?
So mini CPAN is a tool that is mostly used to mirror the tip of CPAN. So the idea is that you want to have a local copy of CPAN. CPAN itself is actually quite large, and most people don't want that much stuff. Instead, what they want is the latest version of everything. And so what CPAN Mini does is it builds that little mirror slice, and you can, every time you run the command, it refreshes it and pulls in the new stuff and removes the old stuff.
But it's getting all the breakage, which is exact opposite of the purpose of a Pinto manually resyncable mirror, which only gets the breakage you want.
Correct. Okay, so Mini CPAN is more automated slice, and yours is more of a manual control thing.
Correct.
Okay.
This is for controlling your production dependencies and
Right, no,
freezing.
I got it. I thought Mini CPAN was in the same family. You're coming from a different direction.
Okay, so I'm gonna get back to the Pinto remote Pinto server thing. I'm gonna make a new repository called remote repo. Now just imagine I'm doing this on some other machine.
We'll imagine an SSH there.
Exactly. Yeah. Just pretend I did an SSH before this. Okay. And now.
Hey, do what you're doing,
I'm going to start my Pinto server.
That's standalone running behind a web server.
This is, at the moment, it's standalone. It's just plain old Plaque running a Starman, actually.
All I do.
No, fine. But now it's a web server.
So now what I'll do is, now pretend that I'm back on. I've logged out of the remote machine and I'm now on my local machine. And I'm going to so repository root equals localhost.
We'll pretend it's another server name.
Yeah, pretend that says something else.
What's your point?
3111.
311, there it is.
Okay, now I can say Pinto pull file slurp, and now it's doing it over an HTTP request.
You're pulling that from CPAN.
Right, I'm pulling it from a public CPAN into this remote Pinto repository.
Yeah, it's your, okay, right, the server you just ran.
I can do an ls. So all the Pinto commands, well, almost all the Pinto commands that you would do on a local repository, you can also in this fashion.
And can I CPAN M at that server as well?
Yep, so let's prove that. I'm going to just install it into a little sandbox here. So I don't want to, pollute the rest of my world. And I'm going to say mirror only, mirror local host 3111. What did I do wrong?
File slurp.
Oh, I need to. Yes, thank you. And you see the log from the server log kind of being out there. I guess I should have redirected that to DevNull.
That's pretty quick.
But there.
Thank you.
That was good.
Nice.
I have a question about how you determine dependencies. So if I have a standard Perl module that you get a distributed car file and you probably looking at another file.
How are you doing the dependencies?
Different server.
Okay.
Let's say I'm using Carton, the CPAN file, to list my dependencies. Can Pinto use the CPAN file directly?
If he's using Carton and CPAN file, can Pinto use those for dependencies?
Yes and no. There is an open issue to teach Pinto how to read a CPAN file. So let's say you've already created an application, you've already got a CPAN file, and you just want to tell Pinto to get all that stuff. It would be nice if you could just throw your CPAN file at it. So there is an open request to do that. The other side of the equation is telling Carton to, so when you do a Carton install or Carton build, I forget what the command is, but you have to tell it to use your Pinto repository as the source. Again, that's just as simple as setting, I think you have to do it through an environment variable to tell Carton, to tell CPAN-M under the hood which URL to hit for dependencies. But in general, Carton and Pinto can be used in conjunction. They're not mutually exclusive.
But if we can't read CPAN file, how would
If it can't read the CPAN file, how's it going to know the dependencies?
Oh, so there's some reading a CPAN file is not that hard. Like it takes about 2 lines of code to convert that into something that Pinto can read, and it's a one-time, or sometimes it can be a one-time thing, so it's not too onerous. But yes, if Pinto knew how to do that automatically, it would be very intuitive. But
somewhere
doing it manually is not impossible.
Somewhere, hopefully, there's a fact about how to do that 2-line magic.
Yeah. I will look for that and send it to you.
I got one last question. Going to end soon. Are we almost done? There's lots of people here.
Yeah. I think we're coming to the end of Q&A. I think.
Yeah, you can shut me up whenever, because I can talk on and on about this.
You have a question, Harry?
One last question. This is more of a justification thing. Give me my environment, which I don't think would need this, but I can understand other environments that would. I want to know where that belongs. My client work environment is pretty basic. Dev staging and production machines, some of VMs. And we just install Perl modules on the dev whenever we want to. I have some root access, I just do CPAN install. So we all share those machines, and we don't have any need for Perl brew and local lib and things of that nature. And I don't think we have a need for Pinto either. But I'm imagining people doing their own builds and their own home directories and playing around with stuff and having lots of different machines to worry about, be more likely to use this kind of a thing. Am I correct in that?
That's right.
Okay, so I can't see the use for this for my environment, but we're only 5 people, 6 people.
You might have missed it at the top, but yeah, we were talking about the applicability of Pinto, and it's not for everyone. If you're happy to have everyone sort of peeing in the same pool, and
trust me, none of the people other than the manager me install modules.
So,
people. And if they do, they'll ask.
Well, and if you're, if it's not too, if it's not the end of the world when an upgrade, when a surprise upgrade breaks something. Well,
it's a small group, and the system admins don't do that with announcements. We know what's going on. Okay, it's very small.
If those things, if isolation and reproducibility are not that important, then no, Pinto is not really that useful.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I wasn't missing something here. And I'd like to mention things to the group if they're interesting. And this doesn't fit our workflow. We don't have a workflow.
Then it wouldn't fit.
Well, if you want to have one,
no,
it's a good place to start.
Trust me, you don't want to mess with what's going on.
I do trust you, and so, but what else? What else? Anything?
I just want to know where it fits into the world. It doesn't fit into my world. It's okay. Just don't know it doesn't fit.
Is there anything else you wanted to cover, Jeff?
I think we covered quite a lot.
Yep.
We usually don't get into the Pinto server at all. So.
We really needed to see that because the people who are thinking of using it would definitely need that. I don't think I'd need it. I might use the basic for helping support the CPAN module that we adopted as a group.
Yeah. So here's a real remote example. This is, like I said, Stratopan is just running Pinto repositories under the hood. So.
Screwed up again.
So here I am, using the Pinto repository that's on the Linode server in Texas, and I'm building that here. So, hey, well, if that's all, I'll let you guys go and get on with your Tuesday.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom and Rick, and Boston.pm.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Okay.